right.
So let's flash back a little bit. I want to flash back. I grew up in the business, in the newspaper business, because my parents were in the business.
Oh, all right.
So I'm reading your biography, and I read how you hooked up with your uncle, who had a recording studio when you were like 7 years old,
7.
and you're sweeping up and cleaning cables and
Yeah,
doing all of
yeah.
that kind of stuff, and by osmosis, you're learning all of this stuff.
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about your uncle's studio and your experiences as a kid, in the oh wow gee
Yeah.
whiz phase,
Wow.
and at what point did you say, I got to do this?
Yeah. Well, I grew up, we were really poor. And I grew up in Brooklyn, and we lived in a tenement in Brooklyn. And I would get on the subway when I was 7 years old, 7, 8 years old. Get on the subway by myself, go to Manhattan, to my uncle's studio, Harry Smith's recording. He had changed his name to Harry Smith because there was a lot of, during the war, anti-German thing. And so I would get to the studio. It was at 2 West 46th Street. And I would go and spend the weekend. He didn't have any children. He was my father's brother, so he was my uncle, but he was also my godfather. So I was like his son. He treated me like his son. And he dressed great. He had always had a lot of money. He had a beautiful apartment on Riverside Drive. He had all the things that, I didn't have.
And this was coming out of the Depression. This is like the late 30s
Absolutely.
we're talking about, right?
Well, early 40s.
Early 40s,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So, and I would go there, and then, people like Les Paul was his best friend. So I would get to hang out with Les Paul, and Les Paul would always rub my head, and mess up my hair all the time. And that went over okay until I got to be like 13 or 14.
Uh-huh.
And then I had the pompadour with the duck's ass, and
It was kind of greasy.
yeah. And he would mess my hair up, and I would, Les, Uncle Les.
Get the comb out.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Fix it.
So, but Bing Crosby would come by. Art Tatum would come on Saturday and use his piano to rehearse or whatever, and or practice, and he would sit me next to him and take my hand. I didn't know who he was at the time. Art Tatum he was just a nice black man. Treated me great. Orson Welles, I got to meet. The Andrews Sisters, Kate Smith, all these people and stars, and I knew then I would, he had me cleaning patch cords, setting up chairs for the band, cleaning the chip off. They didn't have suction.
Right.
At that time, he had a mink brush, and then I would take the filament off and put it in a can, in a metal can. So, and then I would watch him record big bands, and how he would move guys around to get the right balance, and how he made them all take their shoes off because you could hear the foot stomping.
No stomping, right.
Yeah, it was just amazing. So from the time I was 7, 8 years old, it was all I ever wanted to do was be like my uncle. He was my hero at that time.
Well, now, when did you actually get your fingers on the board and start dialing up your own session?
When I first, I went in the Navy. I enlisted in the Navy right on my 17th birthday. I was in the Navy a couple of years, and when I got out, I went to, my uncle called me. I was going to go back to go to college. And my uncle called me on the phone and said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm getting ready to go back to school. And he said, a friend of mine has a great studio here in New York, and they're doing all the jazz and that kind of stuff, and they're looking for somebody. Would you be interested? And I said, oh, you bet I would. So he said, okay. So he called the guy up, who was a good friend of his, a guy by the name of Bob Shoeing, and I went over and interviewed and got the job. And so start Monday, 9 o'clock. So at 9 o'clock I get there, and my boss takes me into the studio area and introduces me to Tommy Dowd.
Wow.
Who became my mentor. And, I kind of jumped into his back pocket, and we got along. We just instantly liked one another. And we got along so well. I was like his kid brother. And he was a genius, you know. I mean, he totally, you know, this guy worked on the hydrogen bomb and all that other stuff. So but musically, he just was fantastic. So he bought me a notebook, and I'd go in, my hours were 9 to 5 or 6, but I never left before midnight. I stayed for all the late sessions and all that. And he bought me a notebook, like kids take to school, you know, and I would draw setups, what mic he used,
Stage
and how he
plots,
set it up.
basically.
And,
Yeah, cool. Studio plot.
Right. So I was doing that, and it was about 3 months into it when I got to the point where I could do, on a Saturday, I could come in by myself and do these little demos. And the demos were, somebody would come in who wrote a song and play the song and sing it on a piano, and I'd give them a disc, and it was $15 or whatever.
Right.
And then someone else would come in and sing happy birthday to their kid, and that was $15. So I'm all by myself, and I could handle that. So at 2 o'clock, I'm waiting for this Mr. Mercer to show up. And all of a sudden, the elevator doors open up, and all these musicians start coming out. And I said, "Where's the studio?" And I said, "Oh, it's right here, but what's going on?" "Oh, we're here for the session." I said, "What session?" "It's a Mercer Records, the Mercer Ellington band, you know, Duke Ellington's band from Mercer Records." "Oh, you're kidding." I said, "Oh, there's some mistake." No. This, you know, I'm playing. No. So I get on the phone with my boss to call him, can't get him. I try to call Tommy, I can't get him. I don't know what to do. I got my book, so I open it up to
a big band page, yep.
And go out there and set up mics. And we only had an eight input console, so I could only set up 8 mics.
And you got how many guys? Like 20 or 30
guys,
guys,
It was like an
right?
18-piece band.
Okay.
Yeah. Billy Strayhorn on piano, and I mean, you know,
Wow.
all the great Ellington, and Duke Ellington. And I kept saying to him, "Mr. Ellington, there's been a big mistake here. I'm just not qualified to do this." And he kept patting me on the leg. "Don't worry, son, we're going to get through this." I guess he saw the look in my eye.
The
and
terror.
He had to, calm me down, or nothing would have gotten done.
Right.
"Don't worry, son." He said that to me about 5 times.
Wow.
"Don't worry, son, we're going to get through this."
Well,
and we did.
It worked, right?
We got
He
through
got
it.
you
It was
through
great. Got through it. We did 4 songs in like 3 hours. It was not the best session I've ever done in my life, but it certainly wasn't the worst.
Hey,
and,
talk about baptism by fire, right?
Exactly. And what happened, what that did, was when people found out I did that, then people would start asking for me, believe it or not. And there was a guy by the name of Bobby Shad who had a label called Sitting In, and I started doing all his work. And then Atlantic Records, who was doing all that stuff with Tommy. When Tommy couldn't do something, I did it. And then on a I think it was a Saturday again, 2 o'clock, Herb Abramson, one of the owners of Atlantic, comes in with a group called the Clovers.
Right.
And we do a record that turns out to be a huge hit. "Don't You Know I Love You So?"
Yeah.
And it was Race Records, you know,
Yes.
they called it.
Well,
So
that's
I
where-
got
that's where
that
Atlantic
reputation.
started, yeah.
And I was doing Clyde McPhatter and the Modern Chairs Quartet. And then we did also all the Prestige records, so all the jazz,
of jazz.
beboppers, and I was a bebopper growing up.
Cool.
So I was working with all these guys that were my idols, and I thought, you know, I was like a kid in a candy store that, you know, with no limits.
Right.
It was amazing. And that's pretty much how it started, you know. And, you know, I can go on to my whole history, but we'd be here till tomorrow morning.